Hello person watching this video. My name is Neko, and today I'd like to take you back to the past. On this second installment in the Let's Remember Pokémon series, we're going to take a look at another major player in the Pokémon franchise, the anime. Once again, for the sake of this exercise in nostalgia, we're going to dive right back into what seems to be my favorite year, 1998. Let's take a dive through time and travel back to that magical year. The key question I'll be trying to answer today is simple. How did I first experience the Pokémon anime? To answer that question, I once again have to go back all the way to the Pokémon Power magazine that was being distributed in Nintendo Power from issue 111 to issue 117. Pokémon Power was a complete guide for the Pokémon Red and Blue versions, as well as the perfect introduction to the Pokémon phenomenon. This little gold mine of information also contains something else, however. Something important. In Pokémon Power, I was introduced to the Pokémon anime through what is called an animanga. Basically, each issue featured an episode of the cartoon in comic book form. For my 10-year-old self at the time, this was amazing. This comic book version of the story was my very first introduction to Ash, Pikachu, Team Rocket, and all the other characters this show had to offer. I remember going through the first comic with awe, spending so much time looking at each panel. I couldn't believe how appealing this new story was to me. From its style to its colorful characters, I was entranced. Pokémon Power had a section dedicated to listing all the TV stations that aired the cartoon at the time. I remember going to my parents and asking if they knew any of these stations, only for them to say none of the stations in the list looked familiar. How many times did I go through the TV guide, desperately hoping to see the word Pokémon? The problem was simple. I grew up in a lost little town called Sainte-Marthe. To give you an idea, think of Pallet Town. In Sainte-Marthe, our cable distributor was a company called Cogeco. That company only distributed a very limited set of channels, and as it turned out, none of them had Pokémon. I was heartbroken. The Pokémon Power comics were my only key to the Pokémon cartoon, and oh boy, did I use that key. The pitiful state my magazines are left in is testament enough to that. By that time, I was going through my first playthrough of Red version. I never thought I'd be able to watch the show anytime soon until one fateful afternoon. On a Monday evening, my friend Chanel gave me a call. Chanel was a childhood friend who lived not too far from my house in my hometown. She frequently went to her grandmother's house after school, where she would hang out until her parents got back from work. When I began my first playthrough of Pokémon Red version, Chanel came over on Friday after school. I had begun my journey on Monday, and by the time Friday came, I had made it to Mount Moon. Together, we would sit at the head of my bed with that lamp between us lighting up the Game Boy Color screen, and we'd play Pokémon. She saw me traverse Mount Moon and make it to Cerulean City, only for us to get stuck trying to fight Misty with Charmeleon and Pikachu. Misty would always knock out my Pokémon with Starmie's Bubble Beam. I remember my friend Timothy joining us that Friday and telling me that my best bet was to catch an Oddish before challenging Misty. With Oddish on my team, we finally managed to defeat Misty. Chanel and Timothy headed home for the weekend, and I continued my journey. My team now consisted of Charmeleon, Pikachu, and Oddish. Anyway, to get back on topic. The next Monday, Chanel gave me a call. She was hanging out at her grandma's place, and she was surprised. On TV, she had seen Clefairy. I was shocked. How was that possible? Chanel told me that her grandma had satellite TV and that she had hundreds of channels. She found out that the channel she was watching was YTV, and that Pokémon was on during the afternoon. I couldn't hide my excitement. She told me that she'd try to see if she could tape some episodes, and that she'd bring the tape when she'd come over for the weekend. The week went by, and Saturday finally came. It was time. Chanel came over, we went to the living room and popped the tape in. It was time for me to see my very first 2 Pokémon episodes. I still remember exactly what the 2 episodes were. The first episode I ever saw was episode 8, The Path to the Pokémon League. Because Chanel had been caught off guard when the episode began playing, she hadn't managed to tape the intro theme. The tape began right as Ash, Misty, and Brock were making their way to a huge outdoor arena with a circus-like tent next to it. This arena belonged to AJ, a promising Pokémon trainer with his faithful Sandshrew. I remember how excited I was to be watching Pokémon. Seeing Ash in action, hearing all the characters' voices, just overall finally being able to watch the show was a real treat. I felt privileged being able to see it at last, and I was completely absorbed by the action on the screen. Ash challenged AJ to a Pokémon battle, and the 2 trainers got on the arena. That's when I heard it. The Pokémon battle theme from the Game Boy game had been orchestrated and was playing in the background as Sandshrew and Pidgeotto were fighting. I can't even describe how excited I was to hear that music in a show. I was entranced by the cartoon and I couldn't get my eyes off Pikachu. This little guy was too lovable for his own good. I remember loving seeing AJ defeat Team Rocket with his Sandshrew and splitting the ground with a devastating Fissure attack. Ash and AJ shook hands and said that someday they would battle again at the Pokémon League, and the episode ended. I was in heaven. I was completely in love with the show, but something made me even happier. There still was one more episode on the tape. The second episode Chanel had taped began to play, once again without the intro. It was episode 9, The School of Hard Knocks. Ash, Pikachu, Misty, and Brock were walking through a thick fog and had come across a young man getting bullied by his classmates. His fellow students were asking him Pokémon-related questions, and he was having a hard time answering. Ash stepped in and intervened, challenging the bullies to a Pokémon battle, only to be laughed at and seen as a waste of time. The bullies walked away through the fog, and the young man introduced himself as Joe, a student at a prestigious school called the Pokémon Technical Institute. When the fog cleared up, Ash and the gang found out they had wandered on the school grounds. When Ash demanded to know who was responsible for students getting treated so poorly, Joe revealed that it was due to a brilliant and beautiful student called Giselle. Ash and Brock were completely in awe upon seeing Giselle's photo, and enraged by this, Misty decided it was time to put this farce to a stop. Walking angrily towards the school, she was determined to find that Giselle and knock her off her high horse. By this point, I was hooked. I was so curious to see where the story would go. I never expected the show had stories like this, and I was excited to see what Misty would do. Chanel and I were loving every second of these 2 episodes, and I already knew I would be rewatching that tape over and over again. Misty challenged Joe to a Pokémon battle to prove him that battle simulations were not an accurate representation of real battles, and she used her Starmie against his Weepinbell, putting herself at a disadvantage. My reaction to that was mixed. I was shocked to see that a grass type like Weepinbell could lose to a water type, but then again, that water type was Misty's frickin' Starmie. After struggling to beat it so much a few days earlier, I knew that Starfish Pokémon was not to be taken lightly. Before Misty could give Joe a speech about how Pokémon types aren't everything, the queen bee of the school herself finally showed up to do it in her place. It was the one and only Giselle, and she made sure that we knew about it.
I'm the top student in the beginning class of the most exclusive prep school in the world, Pokémon Tech. It's sad that others aren't blessed with my beauty, my talent, my humble attitude. People call me a star, but I'm just Giselle.
I remember how I felt when I first saw Giselle. It was a crush. I was only 10 at the time, and I clearly remember blushing and smiling uncontrollably. Everything from her confidence, her voice, her attitude and grace, and her long silky brown hair made me adore her. Before I could make sense of those thoughts, however, Giselle taught Misty the same lesson she had just taught Joe. Using her Graveler, she destroyed Misty's Starmie and sent it flying through the window. Giselle was not a girl to mess with. Devastated, Misty was left speechless. At that point, Ash had seen enough, and he challenged the brunette prodigy to a Pokémon battle. After being ridiculed by Giselle quite a bit, Ash sent Pikachu to battle. Giselle called out her Pokémon, and it turned out to be one of my friend Simon's favorite Pokémon, Cubone. The bone-wielding critter spammed his Boomerang attack on poor Pikachu more times than I could bear, until finally Ash had enough. If Giselle was going to play dirty, it was time to improvise. The following sequence remains one of my favorite Pikachu moments to this day. In a fantastic comeback, Pikachu began using moves Giselle never expected. He dodged Cubone's Boomerang, using his quick attack, and went straight for his opponent's skull helmet. Flipping it over his face, Pikachu then proceeded to use a bunch of melee attacks on the powerless ground type until his own Boomerang came back to knock him out. Giselle was shocked. Joe was shocked. The whole school was shocked. Ash had proven that even without attending the school, he had learned from his experience traveling with his Pokémon. Giselle and Joe made up, and Joe decided to leave on his own Pokémon journey. The episode ended with Ash and his friends waving goodbye to the two students under the sunset, and those words finally appeared on the screen. To be continued. The tape was over, and I was in awe. I had finally seen 2 episodes of Pokémon. I thanked Chanel so much for recording these for me. She gave me the tape, and I remember rewatching these 2 episodes a million times. These were the 2 first Pokémon episodes I ever saw. Which episode do you remember seeing first? Where were you when you did? And what feelings did you get from watching Pokémon for the first time? My history with the show doesn't end here, however. Let's continue this journey of nostalgia for a bit. After all, we have to make our way to a very special movie. Early 1999 was turning out to be amazing so far. Even though we didn't get the English TV stations that aired Pokémon at the time at my house, I still had a few opportunities to watch the show. Every single time I got to see an episode over that period of time, it felt like a special occasion. These occasions were few and scattered, but oh boy did they become carved in my memory. Over the next few months, these are the memories I have of the show. I remember my friend Simon coming over in the spring and telling me about episodes his friends had seen. We were taking a long walk in my hometown, and he told me in detail about the whole SSan saga, with the sinking episode and the island of giant Pokémon. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These episodes sounded amazing. Around the same time, my friend Timothy lent me a tape featuring 3 very special episodes. That tape was entitled Poké Friends, and it featured the episodes where Ash caught his Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. I remember bringing that tape over to John Eric's place and watching it with him and his big brother. We had a blast watching these episodes as a group, and that particular weekend was also memorable for something else. I had gotten my very first deck of Pokémon cards. However, that's a story for another episode. Later that year, during the summer, Simon and I went over to one of his friend's house for a swim. When we got out of the pool and stepped inside for a popsicle, we saw that Pokémon was about to play on TV. We watched it, and it was episode 19, The Ghost of Maiden's Peak. How could I ever forget that episode? I remember how strange the whole thing was, but most of all, I remember feeling so thrilled hearing the burning battlefield track for the first time. Summer vacation was a real blast, and I have many fond Pokémon memories of that summer, mostly involving the first Pokémon plushies I ever got, but that story will also need to wait for another episode. Summer vacation had come to an end, and fall 1999 was around the corner. Little did I know, this season of colorful leaves and cold weather would bring some of my most memorable Pokémon anime memories. Around October 1999, my parents found out that by contacting our cable company directly, we could order a special cable box that unlocked several channels we normally wouldn't get. Imagine my surprise when I heard that soon enough I'd be able to watch Pokémon at home. I was so excited to get that cable box. This was right around the time when I had finally gotten an old TV in my room, and I couldn't wait to get YTV. One night, we got the cable box and hooked it in, and wouldn't you know it, YTV was still locked. I didn't get it. My parents gave the cable company a call, and found out that YTV was part of a set of special channels that required an additional add-on to the cable box. I never expected them to get it, but they actually did. A few days later, on a weekday evening, we finally got that little add-on and plugged it in. I switched the channel over to YTV, and ta-da! The channel worked! I was finally able to watch YTV. I remember being so overwhelmed with joy that I just watched it all evening, even though I knew Pokémon was only on earlier in the afternoon. Everything about this channel filled me with joy and anticipation. Mostly I was hoping to catch a Pokémon commercial or anything Pokémon related. The next day at school, I told my friends I could finally watch Pokémon, and a friend of mine called Christopher told me that he was actually also watching it in the morning at a channel called Fox. He had the same kind of cable box we did, and he said that if I tuned in to channel 39 the next morning at 6:30, I'd catch an episode of Pokémon. Not only that, but there was a second episode at 7:30. He explained that the one at 7:30 was much further ahead in the story, and I was so eager to see that. That evening, I got home and finally got to watch Pokémon on YTV. It was the Goodbye Butterfree episode, and that day I was also introduced to YTV's The Zone. I also discovered that YTV had Dragon Ball Z right after Pokémon, so I ended up watching that too. I set my alarm clock to 6:20 to make sure to wake up on time the next morning to catch Pokémon like my friend had said, and went to bed. I couldn't wait to see what episodes I would see the next day. When I woke up to the sound of my alarm the next morning, I sat up in bed still half asleep. The sun was barely peeking its head outside, and the whole room was bathing in a dim blue light. I reached for the remote and turned on the cable box, and then stretched out of my blankets to turn on the old TV. I remember seeing Alfred Hitchcock's silhouette behind strolling credits and hearing that iconic Alfred Hitchcock theme music. I was wondering if I had tuned into the right channel, until right after the credits ended I was greeted by the Kids WB logo. Soon enough, the Pokémon intro theme began to play, and I was now fully awake. I pulled my blanket around myself and sat in bed watching Pokémon in the morning for the very first time. It was episode 26, Pokémon Sensation. In this episode, Ash dressed up as a girl to sneak inside Erika's Pokemon gym in order to challenge her to a battle. I remember being so stunned seeing Ash doing that. I thought I might have still been dreaming for a moment. I was so happy to finally be able to watch Pokemon at home, and when the episode ended, I went to make myself breakfast. I remember having breakfast during the episode of Hysteria while waiting for the next episode to come on. It was around that time I first saw a commercial for Pokémon Yellow version on TV. I had previously seen previews of this game in Nintendo Power, and I knew I wanted it for Christmas. Pokémon Yellow is deserving of its own little episode, however, so let's get back to the anime. When 7:30 came around, sure enough, another episode of Pokémon began. According to my friend, this one was further ahead in the story, and he was right. This episode was episode 72, The Ancient Puzzle of Pokémopolis. What a strange episode that was. I remember seeing Ash and his friends travel to an archaeological site where the ruins of an ancient civilization had been discovered. Two ancient giant Pokémon reappeared, taking the form of a Gengar and Kadabra. They got into a battle which threatened to destroy everything in their path, and in the end, Jigglypuff was the one to save the day with her song. With memories of these episodes in my head, I went to school. The next morning, I was surprised to see that the 7:30 broadcast had gone back a whole 7 episodes. I didn't know why they did it, but because of that, the episode they aired that morning was number 65, Showdown at the Pokécoral. I remember being happy to see an episode with Gary, but more importantly, I remember being intrigued by a very special scene. It was in this episode that we saw Mewtwo escape Giovanni's hideout. This seed would later turn out to be hinting toward Pokémon the first movie. Around that time, they began showing commercials for the movie on TV, announcing it would hit theaters November 12th. November was right around the corner, and I couldn't wait to see that movie. Because of my limited access to the Pokémon show in its early days, my experience discovering the series remains crystal clear in my memory. I will always hold these first few episodes in a special place in my heart, even though my adventure with this show doesn't end here. There is still much more to be said about this series, but for now, we will move to another nostalgic subject. In the next episode, we will take a look at a very important pillar in the history of this franchise. Pokémon, the first movie.